slide. And someone can confirm for me. Fabulous.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Remember to click record.
Figure out where that is.
Perfect.
It didn't come up verbally saying you are recording, but it looks like it's in recording mode because the options are pause and stop record. So hopefully that means that we have the recording underway. Okay, so we're on the hour. We've got everybody we need. And a warm welcome and good afternoon to everybody. Welcome to day 2 of the ISPAR Conference 2021. Today's session is hosted by the Centre for PE, Sport and Human Movement. My name is Dr Joanne Hill. I'm the lead for the centre. I've also got other centre members, including Alexandra Baird, helping me out today with the chat. And I'd just like to say thank you to the rest of the organising committee, including Angel Chater and Mike Newell for their involvement behind the scenes, and Eva Hayes as well for their engagement behind the scenes. So today is, well, the whole 3 days of our conference are about showcasing our research in ISPAR, about celebrating researcher and alumni success and building external relationships. So we've put together a great diverse group of speakers today, an international group of speakers from different institutions, some people that we already work with or are beginning to work with. Dissemination is key for this event, so please feel free to share your thoughts about today. Here are some of the Twitter handles and hashtags that you can use, the ISPAR 21 hashtag particularly. So let's tell you a little bit about ISPAR if you're not familiar with what we do. We have 3 research centres. We've got the Centre for PE, Sport and Human Movement, led by me. We've got the Centre for Health, Wellbeing and Behaviour Change, led by Professor Angel Chater, and the Centre for Physical Activity and Sport Performance, led by Drs Rebecca Jones and Jeffrey Aldis. Each research centre is then split into 3 special interest groups. And our conference this week reflects those 3 research centres. The rest of the conference on this week, you can catch up with yesterday's session on the university YouTube site, and tomorrow's session, you're not too late to sign up for that if you wish. Let's tell you a little bit about our particular research centre. So the Centre for PE, Sport and Human Movement brings together researchers with a shared critical perspective on participation, policy and representation in and of sport, movement, physical activity in the community, in physical education and school sport, and in physical culture. Researchers in this area are building on over a century of physical education research in Bedford, and our research practice is underpinned by qualitative, reflective and strengths-based inquiry, action research and narrative. We engage in theoretical and practice-based research with impact in school and community settings, and we welcome external relationships. We've developed collaborations with local schools, local authority sport and physical activity providers. This research is also shared in our teaching across our undergraduate and postgraduate programmes. Today, you are going to hear from alumni and staff from the programmes that we have here in ISPAR's postgraduate research degrees. Just like to take an opportunity to thank some of the funders of the research who work with ISPAR, and without whom our research wouldn't be able to take place really, and these are some of the ways in which our research has impact on practice. So let's have a look at today's agenda. So the conference is online. We've been able to take the opportunity to reach a wider audience and to have a wider range of speakers. So who would not otherwise be able to travel to Bedford. So thank you again for joining us. We have 7 presentations today. I'm going to ask people to remain muted and turn off their videos unless they're presenting. The chat is open. Please do ask questions in the chat. It's been monitored and we hope to have an engaging dialogue happen in the chat in addition to the presentations. We've got 3 external speakers. They have 20-minute sessions, which should hopefully include some time for a question or 2 after they finish presenting. And the University of Bedfordshire research presentations are each 10 minutes, again with a bit of time for questions, hopefully, but after each speaker, I'm hoping that they will be able to engage with the chat when they've finished. Wherever you're watching from, we embrace an active campus, so we encourage you to stand and move around during the presentations, and there will be 2 5-minute breaks during the course of today to enable you to do so. All right, so I would like to introduce our first speaker, Albert Adeyemi. Albert is a PE and maths teacher and head of Year 7 in Bedford and a graduate of the university. Albert aims to provide young people with opportunities to play and participate in sport and physical activity and thinking about eliminating barriers which would normally prevent them from taking part. Over to you, Albert, if you'd like to share your screen. Hopefully you can do that over the top of mine. Excellent. Looks like you're up online. Thanks very much.
Perfect. I'm just gonna, so I'm hoping everyone can see that.
Fabulous. Thanks very much, Albert. Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, so I'm Albert Adeyemi. As Dr Hill said, I am a PE and maths teacher. I graduated from the University of Bedfordshire. I'm also a head of Year 7, so that's a new role that I've taken on this year because I'm passionate about pastoral care within education as well. I also lead our mentoring project for Year 8. I'm a master's student at the university currently, so I'm studying my master's in education. I'm in my 3rd and final year of that. So I've just had opportunities to carry out research, etc. I founded Bain We Teach. Bain We Teach was basically the start of my journey into sort of further research and further understanding within education, and where I sort of begin to understand the importance of a culturally sort of responsive approach to education and teaching, especially within PE. And that's just a network which aims to support teachers within education to make sure we're diverse, we're inclusive, and our practice is equitable. And then I'm advocate for the promotion of diversity, inclusion, and equity within education. So culturally responsive teaching. So I thought I'd just start with the basic background around the research, sort of around it. So what is CRT? What is culturally responsive teaching? So I'm hoping that you sort of heard of it, but if you haven't, then here's just a quick run through some of the basics. So what is it? It's, for me, personally, and a lot of what I will say is just based on my experiences, my practice, and just some of the research that I've done. So if you do have any questions, anything to add, please feel free to use the chat function to add to the discussion, because it's all about constantly learning and improving our practice. So I feel that culturally responsive teaching, what is it? It's about connecting students' cultures, languages, backgrounds, life experiences, and bringing that into the classroom. So using your students and using your own sort of cultures, languages, and experiences life to aid our teaching and to improve our teaching and to ensure that each student in our classrooms, in our outdoor spaces that we're using to teach, feel included, right? In physical activity and PE, it's often we see students that don't always feel comfortable or included in PE. They don't. At the current school I work at, we see a number of students who don't feel comfortable coming to PE, and it's about not just, okay, this person's not going to go PE, they're going to go sit somewhere else. It's about having that conversation and beginning that conversation, building that relationship to support them in being physically active and attending lessons and starting that journey to physical literacy. And I put relationships are the foundation because it all starts with relationships. Relationships are how we get to know a student's background. They're how we get to know their culture, what they like doing, their languages. Languages is particularly important, especially with EAL students, so students who English isn't their first language. That's why language is particularly important there. How can we sort of use the basics of their language to still include them, to make them feel comfortable and welcome and be able to take part in our lessons? Are there any benefits? Of course there are benefits, right? So with culturally responsive teaching, it raises the expectations for all students, because all students know that they're expected to take part. They will be catered for within our PE lesson. They will have a part to play in the lesson, whether it's a coaching role, whether it's supporting, or whether it's leading activities, whether it's actually taking part and within that lesson. But every student is expected to be a part of the lesson in one way, shape or another. Helps meet students' needs, right? So when you begin that conversation with students about their backgrounds, about their life experience, about their abilities, what they can do, what they can't do, what they want to get better at, what they want to develop, that's when you begin to meet students' needs. Develops cultural competence, right? It allows you to, so for example, in my practice, when I have these conversations with students about their backgrounds, about, for example, names are a big one, how we pronounce. In our school, we've got loads of students from a Polish heritage, and also students come from all over the place in the world. So Romania, we've got quite a lot of students that come from abroad, and how we pronounce their names. In a lot of places they will go to, they get it wrong, right? And it's about just a simple how do you say your name, right? And that's a part of their identity, and it starts with the basics, but it grows into so much more, right? So develops cultural competence in sort of your understanding of that student, and their perspectives as well, how they see things, how it could be religion, it could be so for example within PE, the month of the duration of Ramadan is a very depending on obviously the demographic of your school. In our school, if we've got a high proportion of Muslim students, so the month of Ramadan is an important period for us, especially as PE teachers, to ensure that we're understanding of what the students are going through, but how can we still support them to be physically active during that time in a way that they feel that they can sort of still go about their normal day whilst fasting. Students feel valued and empowered, right? As soon as you start to understand and listen to our students, they feel valued in your lesson. They feel like they have a part to play. They feel like you care, right? Increase that care for them and about them, etc. How to use our CRT. So how this is just some beginning steps. So CRT, it's about building authentic and caring relationships. So authenticity is key. The reason why I say authenticity is simply because it has to be something that you actually value, right? It can't be something that you're just doing because it's a tick box, right? Students can see through it, and you won't actually care enough to actually follow through on some of the things that matter to the students, and that should matter to the whole classroom. And I mean, a lot of us PE teachers generally, from my experience, generally do have great relationships with students, but then there's always the possibility of a certain demographic of students, whether it's a students from various places in the world. So for example, during Ramadan, it's very easy to say, okay, you don't have to do PE whilst you're fasting, whereas it doesn't mean they can't do PE. Sorry, I scrambled there. I'll move on to the next point. Ensure curriculum is broad, balanced, and relevant. So this one is in the beginning where Dr. Hill was reading a little bit about me. this is one that I'm a big advocate for, simply because the curriculum can be developed, right? So it is possible to introduce new activities into the curriculum. It doesn't have to be a sort of a black and white football, basketball, rugby, hockey, etc. And that's it every year on an ongoing cycle. All right. So I'll talk a little bit later about what I've done in my practice and what I've seen others do to ensure that curriculum is broad, balanced, and relevant is key. All right. So the reason why relevance is key is because what might be great for my students in my school may not be the same for students in a school up north, or a school with students down south. So relevance to your sort of environment and it is definitely key. Explore resources to deepen own understanding. At the beginning I said learning, and everything is from my experiences and my own sort of practice and sort of research I've done. So it's important to explore resources to deepen sort of our understanding. That could be sort of you've spoken to a child and you want to know more a little bit, you want to know a little bit more about the disability they have, what their sort of limitations they may have within PE, how you can include them in your lesson and make sure they feel comfortable and welcome in your lesson. It could be doing a little bit more research about the area that your child is from. So we speak about life experiences. Are they from an area that's considered to be heavily deprived, or are they from an affluent area? So sort of backgrounds and sort of doing a research doesn't necessarily have to be research in terms of text, but it could be research in just in terms of digging a little bit deeper and exploring a little bit more about our students and about how we can improve our practice. So what I wanted to sort of base the main part of my talk on is my journey. So my journey through education, and I'm going to start with sort of primary school, secondary school, sixth form, and then I'm going to move on to my current practice. So and all of my journey is what's sort of got me to this point, and why sort of I'm sort of passionate about understanding my students and knowing how I can sort of be more culturally responsive in the way I teach, not only PE, but in the way I react pastorally. So in my role as a head of year, so in terms of understanding how students are just within education. So primary school, I was banned from participation in a lot of school sports. So I wasn't allowed to play football for the football teams. I wasn't allowed to do any fixtures, and that was because of behavior. So I wasn't necessarily the best behaved child in primary school, and because of that, my consequence was that I couldn't. I enjoyed playing sport, but I wasn't allowed to do any of that. They stopped me from going on trips, etc. And I couldn't compete in fixtures. And then also it was sort of twofold. So extracurricular stuff in primary schools, we had to pay for them. So at the time, my mum wasn't going to pay for any extracurricular stuff because I wasn't behaving. I was being banned from the stuff in school. So why would she pay for the extracurricular stuff? And then for other students around me, the cost element was that their parents couldn't afford it. Right? We wasn't from the most affluent area. I come from a place in southeast London called Camberwell, and it just wasn't the most affluent area. So people struggled for these extracurricular to pay for these extracurricular activities after school. I'll move on to secondary. So my secondary experience of PE was good to some extent in terms of I enjoyed PE. I loved PE. However, as I've grown older and as I've come to sort of university and I studied my degree and trained to be a teacher, I understood that my experience in secondary school, it wasn't broader balance. I put two pictures there, football and basketball. That was the extent of what we done in PE. We had a touch of rugby and we had a touch of cricket and a touch of athletics, but they were very minimal. So through my 5 years of secondary school, the most I can remember is football and basketball. And when I say basketball, it was mainly football, right? And they didn't provide, not many opportunities were provided in terms of going to experience other sports, going to play, so that there was fixtures against other schools, but alternative opportunities, so other things that we're doing, and I'll touch on some of those other alternative opportunities that I'm talking about. But there was, I think, my memorable experience from secondary school was going to the oval cricket ground and watching a cricket match, and that's stuck with me forever. I always remember that was the first time I've ever been to sort of a stadium or a club and watched a professional fixture, and that's always stuck with me. So it just now it illustrates to me the importance of providing these opportunities for our students, because when you come from certain backgrounds, you don't get these opportunities. What may be considered the norm for some people is definitely not the norm for others. And the importance of links with external clubs. So the importance of supporting students within sort of the PE department to progress into competitive sport, if that's what they want to do outside of school, and to continue that physical activity outside of school. And when we start to sort of look at participation outside of school and students wanting to play outside of school, it's all sort of ties into the cogs of physical literacy, and sort of going students knowing how to sort of look for opportunities to participate and play, and continuing that through the lifelong. Sixth form. So sixth form is really where my journey into teaching began. Right. So sixth form, I was inspired by my head of sixth form at the time to apply for a award. It was called the Mark Everson Foundation Award, and that award funded students, so myself at sixth form, up to £500 to go and do something. So others went and done created music videos, or done the Tour de France, or went on other activities. What I decided to do was, in this picture here that you can see, was run a 6-week summer camp for my community. So it was a 6-week football camp. I just realized that there was something missing. There was something that I didn't get opportunities to do, which was play football within my community, go and play for a club. So in sixth form, I applied for that fund and was like, I want to try it and see if I can do this for the young people in my community. So that lasted for 6 weeks, and the aim was simply to remove barriers to participation. Many of the reasons why the young people around my community didn't participate in sport was simply because they couldn't afford it. They didn't know how to access it. They didn't know where to go. All right. So I decided to create something along those lines. And the whole aim was about providing free, low-cost sport for those young people. My current practice. So hopefully from what I've said so far, you can start to see how all of this may sort of build my passion and sort of start to how all of this could sort of be implemented, or how I use this to sort of aid my practice. So my school currently, the school has a community-minded approach, but that's always been my approach anyway. So I've always cared about my community, the young people around me, because from my experiences, right, the challenges that I faced, I should be able to support and make the young people, those that are coming up or coming after us, I should be able to make it a little bit easier. Right? I should be able to make it a little bit more accessible for them. So that's what I do in my practice currently in schools. So it's a community-minded approach, understanding our community. So a lot of my master's sort of assignments, essays, and my dissertation has been around my practice at my current school and our community, and the different sort of wards and levels of deprivation and how that impacts young people and things like that. So I can truly understand where these young people are coming from and implement things to support them within our lessons, but also extracurricular as well. So supporting all students to feel comfortable engaging in PE. That comes in many shapes and sizes. So for example, one example of
Albert, just giving you a 2-minute.
Okay, cool.
Just 2 minutes left. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. So all of that, so supporting young people to engage in PE, yep. Yeah, all of that can come in various different shapes or sizes. For example, at the moment, one example is we've had a boy that is going through a transition, and he's transitioning into into a female, and how we've supported that within PE, because our response impacts students' responses, and our stance on these things, it does impact students. What we are willing to tolerate within our classrooms impacts students, and student voice is crucial. So listening to our students in terms of what they want to do in PE, right? So giving them voice, giving them leadership, allowing them to bring their ideas into the classroom. It doesn't have to be an authoritative, a dominant sort of command style approach, including students in what we do. So just takeaway message: continual learning. All right, so it's all about continual learning. So the there's no one's perfect, right? No one's perfect. We can always learn, we can always improve our practice, and it's important to embark in research or CPD to further our understanding. Connecting cultures, languages, and life experience with what's learned in school is crucial. Valuing the importance of allowing students to identify our students' identity to shape what we do in a classroom and in our curriculum. So making those curriculum adaptations. So one example is American football. American football is quite an expensive sport to participate in. What we've done, there was an opportunity to get £10,000 worth of funding to include it in our extracurricular activities. So I went through that application process and we were successful, and we now have American football as a part of our curriculum, so allowing students to participate in that. And then we've shown students opportunities where they can go to clubs that will support them as well. Understanding the positive impact this can have beyond the school environment. So it's so important that what we do does impact students beyond school. So we talk about, how do we have anti-racist students, or how do we have students that are socially aware, that care about social justice, right? It starts within our classrooms, it starts with learning. And then why does it matter? If it matters, if your students matter to you, then this should matter. All right. So I'm sure each and every single one of us, our students, whether it's at university level, secondary school, primary school, our students matter to us, right? And that means their voice, who they are, their backgrounds, their cultures, their languages, their life experiences should matter to us. We should listen, and we should try our best or learn how to sort of implement that in the classroom in the best way possible. That's me done. Hopefully I haven't gone too over. I don't know. I haven't been looking at time, so I do apologize.
No worries. Thanks very much, Albert.
Either. So any questions?
We do. So thank you very much, Albert, for opening the conference today with your stories of your own and your students' experiences. There are actually some questions in the chat. I think there are 3 there, which are really interesting to get into a little bit more of the sort of practical elements of what you do. So it would be great if you could go and have a look at those questions in the chat. Just in the interest of keeping to time, what I'm going to do is ask Professor Mailer now to share screen and to have our next presentation. And anyone else, if you also have a question for Albert and you would like to ask it in the chat, please feel free, and hopefully Albert will be able to answer those using the chat function. Just to have that back channel going on would be really good. All right, so yeah, Professor Mailer, if you would like to unmute and share your screen. Yvonne, have we got you there? Can you hear us? I wonder whether Yvonne has just had a bit of a technical issue or just popped out of the room for a second. I'm going to give her a few more seconds. Giovanni, are you there to share your screen?
I'm here.
Absolutely.
Can you hear me?
There you are. Brilliant. Yes, I can hear you. Yeah, if you'd like to share your screen, we're ready to
Right.
go.
Okay. Apologies for that. I started
No worries.
and then it took me somewhere else.
Oh, right.
Okay. Right. Right.
Yeah, if you're on the left, you click from the beginning.
Yes.
Excellent. There we go. Thank you very much. All right. Yeah, when you're ready. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Right. So good afternoon, everyone. My talk is about achieving beyond football. So this talk is a collaboration between colleagues in the Institute for Research and Education and also Dr Joanne Hill in ISPAR. And in terms of achieving beyond football, I was invited last year to think about young youth academy players who are playing academy football, for them to think about achieving academically and what that actually might involve, and to give them some inspirations towards that. And that's kind of behind the talk. And I want to kind of take you through the kind of the background which informs a research project that we're proposing to do, which I'll share with you at the end. So we know that in terms of football, ultimately, most young boys wanting to play football want to end up playing professional football. And we know that 25% of professional footballers are from Black or minority ethnic backgrounds. But what's interesting is around what kind of careers they'll have when they finish playing, what happens when you're a youth academy player and you don't actually make it into playing professionally in the football league. And Gareth Southgate has been quite prominent in the news and during the Euro Cup last year, talking about Black and particularly Asian players, that more needs to be done, not just to encourage them into playing football, but to think about the kind of progression they have as part of that, you know, whether they enter management afterwards. But we also know that a kind of a key stumbling block or a barrier to particularly young boys from Asian backgrounds entering football is that they, from within their homes and kind of culturally, they're encouraged to not think about sports, but much more to have academic careers and to favour careers in medicine, law and accountancy. So as part of thinking about also what happens when footballers end their playing career, if we look at Black players in particular, and you look across the professional football league, we know that there are 240 clubs, but only 9 of those managers are from Black backgrounds. And within the top 92 clubs, only 6 of those are from, you know, Black backgrounds. Most of the football, the Black managers tend to manage within the Championship, Leagues 1 and 2, as indicated by the names on this slide. So just to give you a couple of examples, so more recently, Nuno Espirito Santo used to play for Portugal. He was managing Wolves quite successfully, and has recently, at the start of this year, managing Tottenham Hotspur. Patrick Vieira, also another overseas player from France, used to play for Arsenal, currently managing Crystal Palace. But, you know, managers tend to be like Paul Ince, for example, formerly managed Macclesfield Town, Milton Keynes Dons, Blackburn Rovers. I mean, he was actually the first Black footballer to manage a Premier League club, which was Blackburn Rovers. So it's quite difficult to actually get the top management jobs as a former Black player. And if they're not going into management, what are they then likely to be doing? They're most likely to be football pundits, sports commentators, and TV presenters. So I think most people here would be familiar with names like John Barnes, who's formerly played for Liverpool and England. He's very often on Sky Sports, sometimes on Channel 4 in terms of commentating on football, but tends to also do the national England games and also the Euros and the World Cup, for example. Stan Collymore, formerly of Liverpool, particularly local radio in terms of he's locally based in Cannock, does local radio, spent quite a long time on Talk Sport, but he's quite vociferous in his comments, so has been experienced a lot of criticism. Garth Crooks, you know, used to play for Stoke, Tottenham, again, has quite a high profile in terms of sports, but he also has is involved in local levels as well. John Dublin, again, I've included him here because not just only is he a sports pundit, but also many people might be familiar with seeing him on Homes in the Hammer, which is a home program, buying at auction, which I quite like watching. Hence, I could name a football player as being John Dublin, well, a former player, and Rio Ferdinand, who let you spit Chelsea and AC Milan, Jermaine Genus, and Ian Wright, who interestingly was critiqued quite a lot when he was playing for Arsenal, and has experienced a lot of criticism and racism as a sports pundit. But again, his presence has increased quite a lot in the last couple of years. And as I said, the title to this talk is about achieving beyond football. So if Black players are not achieving in terms of management, if they're not going into sports, being a sports commentator, do they actually achieve academically? We know that a number or a small number of Black players actually have degrees and also postgraduate degrees. And again, I've got, you know, 7 names on here who you might be familiar with. So one of the ones that I was really interested in is and intrigued, because I don't have a background in sport. I don't have any interest particularly in football, but in actually doing some research for this, I was quite interested to find out that Clark Carlisle, for example, had 10 GCSEs at grade A. He has a degree from Staffordshire University. You know, he's been in professional sports writing and broadcasting. He actually won the show, which was led to him being named the Britain's brainiest footballer. And he also was on Countdown in 2010, and he won one of the shows on Countdown, which some people know is a test of your knowledge. And he's also chair of the Professional Footballers Association. Shaka Hislop, again, I was really impressed to learn that not only does he have a mechanical engineering degree from Howard University, which is a Black university in the States, but he also had an internship of 6 months at NASA Space Center in the USA. You know, exceptionally academically gifted individuals. You know, Vincent Company has an MBA from Manchester Business School, and he has also received an honorary degree from the University of Manchester for his services to football. Romelu Lukaku is multilingual, speaks 6 languages, has a degree in sports, tourism and public relations. And, you know, it's the UEFA Europa League player of 2019 to 20. So again, very academically able individuals. You know, Chris Smalling had a place to do study financial economics at Loughborough and Leicester, but instead decided to play football after, you know, his A-levels. there are
just a 2-minute notification.
She'll speed along. So we have Black footballers who've received, you know, awards, one of titles and honours. So one of those who's been in the media for the last year, Marcus Rashford, you know, for his free school meal campaigns. He got the government to change their mind. And we heard today that his influence on the media, he's now going to be included in a sports, sorry, the GCSE media studies, GCSE media studies course, from next year. We've got other Black players who've received MBs, CBs and awards. We've got Black individuals who've had very important roles. Again, Barack Obama, President of the United States. We've got serving Black politicians, you know, Conservative and Labour politicians. We've got poets, journalists, newspaper editors. You know, the first editor of Vogue is Eugene Robinson. So the very important roles that they've held. So one of the things that we wanted to do in terms of this collaboration between the Institute for Research and Education, where I'm based, and also ISPAR, where Dr Joanne Hill is based, is to actually think about a project which seeks to understand the kind of intersectional identities that youth academy players bring to playing football alongside their kind of academic abilities. So these are students from Black, Asian and minority ethnic backgrounds. And what we would like to do in terms of the project is to map how academy youth players, to look at their academic interests and how that their academic abilities actually fostered by the youth academy football clubs, which encourage them to pursue A-levels and also undergraduate and probably postgraduate study. And depending on their age, map their qualifications and the type of playing careers that football enables them to achieve. So what do they achieve outside of actually being a youth academy player? And also part of this interest is informed by the fact that within Europe and the US, sports individuals are actually encouraged to study beyond compulsory schooling. You know, they get scholarships to do degrees and so forth. And also, but we tend to see that within football and sports generally here in the UK, the emphasis is on playing rather than actually pursuing academic study. And also there's a lot of stereotyping, particularly in relation to Black boys, that they tend to go into football because they're not academically able. And that's also supported by research by the OECD, which links playing sport with actually being academically low performer. So in terms of the project, we're hoping it will be a 2-year project, case studies of football clubs in ethnically diverse, youth academy football clubs in ethnically diverse areas, such as Tottenham, Luton, who are in the Championship. So we'd have a mixture of youth academy clubs, which are in the Premier League, but also in the Championship, and maybe a link to a less ethnically diverse club in an area like Colchester, which is a League 2. And we're hoping it will be a qualitative study, which allows us to spend time talking, interviewing stakeholders, and also conducting focus groups with academy young boys as part of that process. We're hoping the participants will be aged between 14 to 21, which again allows us to map their progress over time and to look at what they're studying, and also to the interviews with stakeholders to try and understand from them the extent to which they are able to support youth academy players to progress academically, and what are the challenges involved as part of that process. So this is where we are at the moment, just at the beginning of drafting this proposal. But what I've tried to do is to kind of give you the background as to why we think this is being an essential research project. So thank you. Hope I've kept the time.
Thanks very much, Professor Maylett, for giving us that insight into the experience of some players and the overview of the research project. I'd like to invite people to ask any questions based on this presentation that you've just seen, and I'd like to ask our next speaker, Alex Baird, to share screen now. But yeah, if you've got any questions for Professor Mailer in the meantime, anybody, then the chat is open. Great. So yeah, I'd just like to introduce our next speaker. We've got Alexandra Baird, who is a lecturer here at the University of Bedfordshire, and she's going to present a little bit of her Ed.D research. So over to you, Alex.
I was just trying to start my video as well. Sorry, hopefully you can hear me now.
Yeah, you're good, thank you. Can hear you.
Okay, so my name is Alex Baird, and I'll dive straight in with the regulations. I'm going to be talking about sex and relationship and health education in specifically primary schools. So regulations made relationships education compulsory in all primary schools, and health education compulsory in all apart from independent schools where PSHRE remains statutory. The regulations were due to come into effect from September 2020. Unfortunately, the ongoing COVID effects meant that this was delayed until summer term 2021. And it's obviously also affected the ongoing provision of the subject. Regulations signify the first significant change in relationships, sex and health education in nearly 20 years, and a notable addition includes lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender content as part of relationships education. Now, whilst the government advocates that sexuality education is a British value, tensions clearly remain in government, given that they advocate for it to be treated flexibly around the cultural and religious background of pupils and the specific character of schools. In response to historical contention, so that includes the notion of childhood innocence and the legacy of Section 28, DfE have placed the responsibility on schools to decide how to deliver content age and developmentally appropriately. Adding to these tensions, parents can no longer withdraw their child from relationships or health education. And in fact, schools have been instructed to engage actively with parents around their RHE curriculum. Primary schools have the option of whether and what sex education they cover, and it's from this that parents have the right to withdraw their child. The lack of guidance within RHE guidance and that DfE has produced is also concerning, given the continued marginalised status of the subject, teachers lacking confidence around delivering the subject, a lack of provision in terms of CPD as well in the subject. So this research addresses the limited scope of research around RSHE and specifically within the primary sector at such a significant and pivotal time. But I will draw on some relevant literature here. So firstly, Kirby 2019-2020 talk about the historical cultural context of primary schools. She talks about pupils being constrained to be still and silent, often feeling physically and emotionally uncomfortable in the classroom, where difficult emotions are expected to remain outside the classroom. Quinlivan talks about actually teachers need to think within sexuality education about including what she talks about effective failure. So that's engaging with queer theory to challenge hetero and gender normativity. Carlisle 2019 looks at the delivery of RHSE in primary, and specifically within a primary that is delivering to a wide and diverse religious community. What she found was that pupils who had religious beliefs were actually willing and able to think creatively and sensitively around LGBT inclusion. A lot of researchers have said that the effectiveness of RSHE depends on engaging with pupils, so allowing pupils to lead the way, and training both pre-service and in-service teachers in LGBT themes and gender themes more generally. Designing RSHE lessons, although, does raise conflict. So members of the No Outsiders Equality Programme, some members chose to highlight LGBT histories and LGBT stereotypes, and others chose to challenge the binaries that the labels gay, lesbian, boy, girl actually produce. So just moving on to the actual research I did. So I accessed a school that knew me quite well because I realised that the themes might have hindered my access to the school. So Park School is a large multi-ethnic primary school in London to learners from the age of 2 to 11. It's got a majority Muslim population. It's got a high proportion of EAL learners, that's English as an additional language, and 26% of pupils receive free school meals. Participants included 5 non-LGBT female identifying teachers. They held a range of roles and experience, but they were all currently teaching in Key Stage 2 and critically had all taught RSHE in the past. The ethnographic methods that I used not only collected data, but actually enabled the researcher and the participants to engage in what Springay and Truman referred to as the speculative middle. So becoming entangled in tensions, becoming aware of new realities and asking new questions. So I think it's important to highlight here that the school's RSE policy referred to the school as being LGBT inclusive, and the RSHE curriculum as supporting all pupils for the sexual relationships they might have in the future. To achieve this, however, curriculum strategies and pedagogies needed to go further. There's lots of findings that I could share with you. There's 2 specifically that I'd like to share at this point. The first was that the RSHE curriculum was actually provided by an external provider. And whilst this initially gave teachers a feeling of confidence, of course, any enhancement to the lesson and the resources relied upon the teacher's own interest, experience, and knowledge. And therefore, it was just a short-term gap, really, to the CPD that they hadn't experienced. The pedagogies themselves needed to be much broader to ensure equitable and open discussions in class. So whilst they were talking about discussions being open, they very much still led those discussions. And the resources produced were all whole class activities which didn't really consider individual learners' needs. The second issue was about perceptions. And the teachers held a great number of perceptions in relation to what pupils and teachers, pupils and parents could bear in relation to the RSHE curriculum. And these were starting to filter into the institution more widely without actually engaging with pupils and the parents. And this resulted in teachers reacting or having to react spontaneously or retrospectively to their pupils' needs, rather than actually empowering both themselves and their pupils. So there were gaps in knowledge for the pupils in sex education. And within one of the relationships education lessons, which specifically looked at trans identities, it was quite clear that actually it didn't extend people's pre-existing knowledge of trans identities any further. One pupil actually talked about grey sexuality, and she wanted to probe a little bit further, but the teacher didn't feel knowledgeable and able to do that, and actually sort of drew back to the slides in front of her. So hopefully
just a 1 minute notification.
Yeah, that sort of wraps up where I am. So if there's any questions, I'm quite happy to answer those.
Fabulous. Thanks very much, Alex. A big virtual round of applause for you. And yeah, well, I'm just going to offer out to the chat. We've had one question in from Michelle. So Alex, if you'd like to go over to the chat and address that would be fab. Right, hang on, I need to share. We are running a tad behind time, so I'm going to reduce our 5-minute break down to 2 minutes. So we will reconvene at 57 minutes past the hour. So maybe not time to go make a cup of tea, but enough time to stand up and take a few steps around your room, have a short stretch, and we will reconvene very shortly. And I'm going to ask our next external speaker, Janelle, if you could be ready to share your screen to reconvene in 2 minutes. All right, Janelle, if you are there and ready to share your screen.
Yeah, no problem. Just a second.
Excellent, no worries. Okay, while you do that, so it is a pleasure to introduce our next external speaker, Janelle Meisenheimer, an elementary PE teacher, varsity girls soccer coach, who I engaged with over Twitter regarding our shared interest in social justice teaching in PE, and particularly practical ways of teaching the subject. So I'm going to pass over to Janelle. As always, all speakers, please do engage with the chat with any questions for Janelle. Over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. So why not PE2, social justice teachings? These are just some examples that I've been doing and want to keep building. Hopefully they spark some ideas or start conversations about culturally relevant and just pedagogy. It will always be growing and changing, just like our world. And I believe that we need to grow and change with it. So these are some of my attempts at that. So a little bit on me. I am American. You can probably tell with my accent. And I currently live in Brussels, Belgium. I'm an international teacher and have taught in UAE and Dominican Republic as well. And I wear quite a few hats right now, but some of the big ones are PE elementary teacher, varsity girls soccer coach, which is U18 soccer, and also curriculum coordinator for a nonprofit. And then I've been engaging with other PE teachers with social justice teachings. And then also with my school, there's an awesome social justice curriculum group. And we've been working on getting social justice standards into the whole school, little pre-K all the way up to grade 12. So some of the talking points, why social justice in PE, some classroom culture examples, some lesson examples, and then how to implement. It's all about those examples for you all. And so PE is a social justice issue. Some of those issues are related with, but not limited to, self-identity, body image, ability, multilingual learners, gender, culture, race, religion, sexual identity, and so on. So just seeing that list, you know, what are some experiences that you've maybe had or that you know of in relation to these social justice issues? And I'm sure we all have a story or know someone with a story. So just some examples for classroom culture. How can we make our classroom more accessible to all our students in our day-to-day? So I have some examples with grouping, visuals, and routine. In my classroom, when my students make their own groups, we have expectations of it that the activity or game does not start until everyone's included, and they know to grab anyone and everyone. And if your group is full, they know to not just walk away from a kid who's like, can I join your group? They know that language of, hey, I'm sorry, we're full, but we will help you find a group. And I've noticed a huge difference in just even body language with my students when they don't feel overwhelmed with picking groups. They know they're going to get taken care of, or they know that they have that inclusive environment. And that's been really, really nice to watch my students take that initiative with their peers. And then also with visuals, this is something that was big from my first school, Capcata Heritage School in Dominican Republic. They were awesome with our multilingual students and students with learning disabilities with visual aids in your classroom. So having icons or pictures that represent different routines in your classroom, a snapshot, picture, or drawing of the setup of the activity to make context, like connections. And then with text, just as simple as bolding, underlining, and highlighting can be really beneficial for those students. For routines, solid routines help with students accessing your classroom and knowing what's going on and feeling a part of the classroom culture. So having a warm up on the board that the students already know and they organize themselves. It's rough the first couple lessons, and then after that, they know how to organize each other. They know how to do the grouping. It's all on them, I tell them. And also when they do go into groups, sometimes I'll have them meet for just a minute or two and go over like what they expect of each other with behavior and respecting each other. And also with routines, chances to prove their knowledge in different ways, not just in a way that's physical. So just real quick, a couple more specific examples. For those visuals, you can see there's some icons, there's some bolding, some highlighting, an example. So I make instructional videos for my students to learn activities and games so they can go at their own pace. And then I've taught them how to take notes with those videos. And so this is up all year for them to look at. And for those routines, the one with chances to prove different ways to prove their knowledge with these mastery checks. This is a go-to one that I do a lot, and they can tell me in a debrief session, or they can tell me later, or they can write it down. So some student leadership opportunities. I like saying student leadership instead of giving your students voice, because that's the teacher has the power and is giving permission. So I like to create more of a co-constructing and student leadership opportunities. And so how I do that a little bit is they can teach a warm-up to the class. My students are from all over the world, and they probably have amazing, for example, a tag game that from their country or from a previous school, and I want them to share it with us. So they fill this out, they turn in, and then where the warm-up is, I magnet it on the board, and they can go to it, and they know that it's like their turn to get it going. Choices in activity, I get this from, I'm not gonna go into it too much, but I'll just show you, it's from the Modern Classroom Project. I've had some training with that, and it's all about student leadership with mastery grading and self-pacing and classifications in your lessons. So there's the must-dos, the should-dos, and the aspire-to-dos, and it's just different choices for the students. And this is things that I'm still working on and bringing in with, you know, either with dance or games. The students did do a create your own game as kind of a review wrap-up unit as well. So some lesson and unit examples for you. I did some adapted lessons with striking and fielding, and I'm going to bounce around a little bit because I have a video to show. So hopefully it's. Okay, so as you can see, there was a lot going on in that video. We talked about guide runners in the Olympics, and we used them in that adaptive game. So the kids were blindfolded, of course, safety first. We went over safety and clearing the path and everything. But the guide runners told them where the ball was, they kicked, and then they helped them run to a zone, and then they were safe in the zone and could run back. And then the fielders had different access with their arms. Either they were in a sling and no arm, or they held on to something to remind them to only use the other arm. And then after that lesson, we did another one with scooters, and they were on scooters the whole lesson. So even if they needed to get water or come talk to me and I was on the other side of the gym, they had to stay on their scooter. And so then after that, we reflected on those lessons, and just to show you their Padlet. I'm not gonna like read it too much. I just wanna show you a little bit, but they talked about bravery and, you know, just being more understanding and helpful and don't judge. And it's just, they know about the world and they wanna know more about the world. And it was just a great opportunity to see them connect with that and want to take it outside of the classroom. So another one I did recently was in the Me, We, PE unit. It's a cooperative learning and identity unit. And for the younger students, they did an identity map. And these were things that we talked about in the unit as well, like your interests, strengths, and goals, and your needs with yourself and with your peers. And then with the older kids, they did a social identity reflection on a Google form, and filled out questions about like languages they connect with, countries they connect with, opportunities they've had because of who they are. Were they easy? Were they hard? And some of those questions were hard for them, but then I would sit with them and it would be good conversations with them as well. And because my classroom set up with self-pacing, there was other activities going on that they could scan QR codes and learn the next activity, and I could have those discussions with the students. So this is a goal of mine. I wanted to share goals as well. I haven't done this yet, but I think this unit is January. Yeah. So I'm going to be doing this in Invasion Games. So it'll probably be 2 or 3 lessons, and it will essentially be an invasion game with 4v4, with one team having completely different rules. And one team will have rules that favor them for the game, and another team will have rules that don't favor them in the game. And then after the game, we'll have reflections like we did with the striking and fielding, and we'll discuss fairness, privilege, who deserves it, who actually gets it, and where else in the world do you see these power struggles. And like I said, the kids want to know more about the world and they want to share. And I'm hoping that we'll have some good sharing chances about race, gender, abilities, etc. All right, so how to implement some of this, because I know it can be kind of overwhelming when you see a lot of information or examples. So you can either try and dip your toes. I do recommend that lessons and units are a little more impactful, but I know that teachers have crazy lives and sometimes it's like those little steps first. So try and find just little add-ons in units that you already have and check how you know your kids. Could you do an identity activity to get to know them better? Or see where you can add little adaptations to the lessons, like those blindfolds and the striking and fielding, or the scooters as wheelchairs. Check if routines have some student leadership opportunities, because it's also about how we teach to make it more equitable. And then if you want to like wading in, are there lesson opportunities that can happen in existing units that have potential to teach social justice issues? An adaptive lesson like the combo that I showed you, or purposely have some teams with different rules and discuss how it feels and what can be done about it. And student leadership with maybe having like a fill in the blank activity, like you do the first round and then groups need to talk about using a different rule or how to change the game or roles in the game, things like that, and just co-constructing with your students. So, or just full on diving in and having a unit with it. So are there units that can be adapted or created to be more inclusive and socially just? Like that collaboration identity unit, the Me, We, PE, it's essentially adventure-based learning with those team building activities. A unit with different cultures represented, dance, games, activities, and student leadership in co-constructing. So this is another goal of mine that I'm thinking about doing. It might be at the end of the year. I'm not quite sure yet. And it's something I'll do with most likely with the older kids to try it out first, but something like the kids almost give a resume, almost like they apply for what they believe they have some expertise in and can share with their students around skills that we've done in PE throughout the year. And then the other students can sign up almost like a mini workshop and sign up and try and learn new skills or get better at skills that they want to get better at with their own peers. So I'm excited to try that out. Some resources to get started as well. This Padlet right here has multiple different resources. I made it in the spring because I just kept finding so many awesome people taking initiative with social justice practice in their pedagogy, and I needed it for myself altogether because that list started getting long. So I made that, ended up sharing it. And then even on that Padlet, there's some resources that have like a lot together as well, kind of like when I created. Phys Equity is a great website with blogs and resources and support. They're on Twitter as well. And then also this book, Teaching with Social Justice Issues in Physical Education. And each chapter has great examples, and shout out to Dr. Hill. So that's pretty much all I have for you today. Yeah, I had one more thing that I can show, but it's okay. It was just with the Modern Classroom project and showing you a little bit more into the classifications of the lessons with the options with the students. So I recommend checking that out. It's called Modern Classroom Project. They have a free course that you can take, and they also have podcasts. And there's even a podcast that's on a more equitable teaching, and there's some really good ideas with that as well. So if you have any questions, I think we're doing it via chat.
We'll stick with the chat. Yeah, that would be awesome. Just we have one question for you already from Michelle, which is lovely to see Michelle engaging with the questions so much today as well. Shout out to Michelle. Fab. So thanks very much, Janelle, for sharing those really good practical examples. I think the video of today's session should go on your Padlet as well, and it'll be a really good resource.
Will do.
For showing how you've thought about what social justice can look like in practice in a PE space. So that's wonderful. Thank you very much. So yes, to the rest of the audience, if you would like to ask some questions to Janelle in the chat, that would be fab. And I'm going to ask our next speaker, Stuart Wilson, to get ready to, there you go, start sharing. So Stuart Wilson is one of my colleagues here in the School of Sport Science and Physical Activity, senior lecturer in sport development management, and is going to be presenting on an international project called She Got a Game. Over to you, Stuart.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for the introduction, Joe. As Joe said, I work at the university as a senior lecturer in sport development, and I'm leading on a project that currently ISPAR are running, a pan-European project that is looking to develop some solutions around how we can better increase the engagement of girls and young women into sport and physical activity. It's a European partnership that is involved in the project. There's 5 organisations that are engaged across the UK, and from Belgium, Denmark and Netherlands. Those organisations are, 2 of them are NGOs, ISA that are based in Holland and again Denmark are NGOs. Sport in Antwerp is the municipality of Antwerp, and they effectively in the UK context like the local council that have a big sporting presence in Antwerp. And then there's a UK charity called Street Games who are also engaged, and then ourselves. And the emphasis of the project is to support community sports organisations and community sports coaches to think and act differently in terms of how we support young women and girls to be involved in sport and physical activity. And really the emphasis on that is, for too long, I suppose, the emphasis has been on the individual. The emphasis has been on the fact that the participant has to make the change. This project very much looks at the fact that it's the system that needs to change, not necessarily participants. It's very much looking at how we work with organisations and how we work with young volunteers and individuals within organisations to think differently, act differently, behave differently, in order to create new opportunities for girls to take part. So there's lots of work that we're doing around changing of mindset and behaviours and questioning people's values and how sport and physical activity is presented itself, how it presents itself, and effectively what we're talking about really is sport with a small s. The traditional notion of sport, lots of the partners that we work with, Street Games, all of them, Street Games, Game, ISA and Stad Antwerp, are very much about inclusive activities, using sport as a hook, but very much packaging sport as a social activity that isn't emphasising some of the traditional notions of sport around competition and what comes with competition in terms of maybe some of the more masculine notions of aggression and other things. So it's very much emphasising that this is about inclusion, this is about activity, this is about engagement, and consequently the organisations that are involved in the project and work on the project operate in very distinct ways. The best possible example, I think, is to bring it to life a little bit, is the type of thing that Game Denmark do. They have a series of what they call houses across Denmark. There's about 5 houses that they have. Their main one is in Copenhagen, but they have them in various places, Viborg, Aalborg, across Denmark. But they're all about, their hashtag is We Love Asphalt. They're all about the fact that activity, sport can take place in any location, and they push the asphalt thing. But the houses are quite interesting situations because they've got the asphalt inside. They have set up traditional basketball, football, things. But there's also around that, the opportunity to do skateboarding. There's dance studios. There's a little cafe going on. There's DJ booths. There's music. So it's very much an all-encompassing kind of, as it says, a house where a young person can come and feel part of a community and engage and take part. And sport is almost the sideshow in a funny kind of way. It's something they do as a byproduct of being engaged in the house being engaged in the activity, and all the organisations operate in that kind of way, not putting sports square and centre what they do, but it's something that we hook people in with, you know, as a byproduct. Interestingly, and it's perhaps the way that the Danish government and organisations operate, but this is an old railway repair workshop that the Danish Railway Authority didn't want anymore, and they donated it to Game Denmark as one of their houses. It was in kind of prime location in Copenhagen. Possibly wouldn't happen like that in the UK, because that building would have commercial value and the rail company would want their money back. But in the Danish context, you know, the rail company were happy to donate this to turn it into this asset for young people in the community. And when you're at a place like this, it's kind of a really vibrant atmosphere that goes on within these houses. It's kind of a really interesting place to be and experience. So what we're doing within this project, the She Got Game project, there's 3 or 4 things that we're focusing on. There's 3 or 4 activities that are going on kind of all at once. The first thing is, and this is the bit that actually the university are leading on, is we are developing a toolbox, a guidebook, if you like, to support organisations in enacting some change around how they engage young women and girls into community sport. And again, that's very much focused on systems change, and we'll come on to that. And that's the first thing, an organisational kind of approach. The second thing we're doing is providing a training programme for young sports coaches, trying to develop a situation where young women and girls come on a short training program, are upskilled in the way in which to engage other women and girls, and effectively try and become those kind of peer-on-peer recruiters, and you know, some of the co-creation stuff that we're just hearing about, really, you know, working with peers to develop sessions, you know, girl for girl sessions. Then what we're also doing is trying to capture some of that through video stories in the field, doing some monitoring and evaluation, and then all of that is going onto an online portal for sort of information, support and guidance for other people to learn the lessons that we're learning as we go through this process. So what we'll just quickly do is whiz through each element of the project. So firstly, the guidebook. As I've said before, the work we're doing around organisational change for community sports organisations is very much around system change. It's our contention, I suppose, that for too long the emphasis has been on the fact that it's the individual that has to change, and we believe that actually it's not the individual that needs to change, it's the system that needs to change. So we're utilising some of the work of Otto Scharmer, who does who's got some interesting pieces of research around wider system change. He's got something called Theory U, and if you've got an out there, there's a really interesting YouTube clip that you've got out at the moment about innovation in the face of disruption, and how systems have to adapt and change following the COVID pandemic. Let's say Otto Scharmer is all about wider system change, and what we're doing is we're taking that and contextualizing it in terms of sport, physical activity, and some of the gender inequalities that exist currently within the sector. So we're working with organisations to support them through this process, and it's very much about challenging existing preconceptions. It's very much about questioning existing mindsets. There is a little bit of disruption, I suppose, in there. Is, you know, we're offering a sense of disruption in terms of disrupting thinking, and for some people, the information that we present through the guidebook and some of the support sessions that we run is actually a little bit uncomfortable, and in many ways that's a good thing. Actually, if people are uncomfortable with some of the points that we are making, or some of the questions that we are asking, or some of the scenarios that we are setting out, then we think that's beginning to make people think. And the purpose of all of that is to initiate some different ways of working across the wider system. And that's the kind of the ambition of working with organisations to get them to think differently, to get them to reflect on what they currently do, and ultimately get them to act differently in terms of the way in which they they present their narrative and their messages and all the things they do around trying to engage people in sport and physical activity. There's got to be a bit of a system change in that arena, and that's what we're attempting to do with organisations. So there's a bit of a blended learning package of materials that we offer organisations. We have a series of short kind of webinar PowerPoint presentations that are asynchronous, recorded through Panopto, but explore, some of the issues. Those PowerPoint presentations are supported with some information documents, and within the information documents, we have blended together some of the theoretical thinking around system change, sport and gender inequality, and try to tie that together. And then within that, there's also some reflective tasks and activities for individuals in organisations to complete, to get them again to think about what they're doing, how they're doing it, and whether what they can do can be different. And then we support that with seminar workshops. So we've done some work. We've gone into individual organisations to support them through, thinking differently. And then the next one is in November, where we've got a conference that's being run in Antwerp at the back end of November, where we will deliver a seminar workshop around this with organisations again, just to bring it to life on a face-to-face basis. So that's the work with organisations. Alongside the work with organisations, it's kind of
just giving you a 1 minute notification.
Yeah, cool. It's kind of a top-down and bottom-up approach. The top-down is the work with organisations. The bottom-up is the work with young volunteers and coaches that we're looking to work with to enact this change on the ground. From that, we've created a training program with, as you can see there, they're the 8 leading principles that underpin the training program, and wrapped around that is a nice little engaging interactive workshop that we've developed, and we delivered the first one of those at the beginning of September. The idea was to bring lots of people together from the 5 different locations, but COVID came along and hindered that a little bit. So the image on the left is training being delivered in Antwerp, led by Stad Antwerp, Easter and Game. The training on the right is stuff that's done in the UK by Street Games in the valleys of Wales. Different settings, different examples, but the same outcome around what we're looking to achieve with the young people. Moving forward, where we are now, the project still has a good few months to run. We are beginning to evaluate some of the impact of the guidebook, the impact of the training program on the organisations and coaches. That work is ongoing. We're sifting through some of the stuff now. Longer term, the big picture thing, the organisations that we want to initiate a movement. We want things to be different. The same old status quo existed too long. We have to enact change in this area. And then that will hopefully lead into further development of new Erasmus projects that look on, focus on implementation and rolling this out further. If you want a little bit more information, the project has got a website. She's got game.eu, and then there the websites of some of the partner organisations, particularly Easter Game and Street Games, who are involved. And then if you've got any questions, obviously I've seen 1 or 2 come through on the chat. Drop me a line. I'll answer in the chat now, or if not, that is my email address if anybody wants to get in contact and have a chat about what we're doing. Is that time up, Joe?
Thank you very much, Stuart. Fab to hear about this project, which has been ongoing for a little while, and to see how you've been progressing it. Thank you very much. So I'm going to invite people to ask questions in the chat. I'm going to share my screen. I'm presenting next. So yeah, if there's any more questions, that would be great to have those going on in the chat. Hopefully it is now sharing my screen. Somebody let me know if you cannot see my slides. I have closed down chat though. I'm going to invite Olivia to unmute and join me to speak. So 2 presentations left. Firstly from myself, Olivia Flemons and Emma Hunter. And then our final wrap-up speaker is Dr. Michelle Flemmins. So I'm presenting today some of the preliminary results from an ongoing research project. I'm joined by research assistant Olivia Flemons. Emma Hunter is our co-author, but not presenting today. And our work is about meaningful and sustainable physical activity at home. So since March 2020 in the UK, the COVID-19 pandemic has enforced restriction and social distancing measures, which have affected physical activity, as well as other aspects of life. So we've had time away from gym spaces, swimming pools, leisure centres, and organised sport, which has meant that the home and garden and local areas have become focal points for physical activity, especially during lockdown, when exercise outside the home was restricted to once per day in the local area. Having researched girls' engagement in physical activity in homely spaces in previous research with Dr. Lara Azzurito, I picked this idea back up. And when lockdown affected our ability to access physical activity outside the home, I was interested to revisit how home might be a sustainable and meaningful place in which to be physically active. I'm going to pass to Olivia to overview what we know from some of the existing research on the amount and type of physical activity during COVID and at home.
Thank you. So in line with the adjustments in lockdown measures, the magnitude of a physically active population has actually declined slightly, with supporting research stating that sedentary behaviour has increased. We can see this in figure 1, which compares the 2018 to 2019 to the 2019-2020 figures of physical activity in general. And we can see here that after the initiation of the first lockdown, there was a 7.1% decrease in physical activity overall. Now, this could be due to simple things such as gym closures, the initiation of the non-essential travel, closure of exercise classes, but from a theoretical point of view, it could also be due to the inability to satisfy the basic psychological needs required to motivate individuals to take part in physical activity. And that's because all of the factors that do motivate people to take part have been taken away. So, for example, having those sports practitioners, having the access to outdoor space, and even having that social interaction with peers. Next slide, please. So due to the inaccessibility to physical activity outside the home, many people have resorted to physical activity inside the home, as this has been deemed a feasible method to not only increase physical activity motivation, but also mental and physical well-being. A study that's quite key here is Cowley et al. It was a Horizon project, and they looked at the feasibility and preliminary effectiveness of home-based exercise interventions for adolescent girls. Now, a strength in particular for this study was that the researchers gave the girls the choice of the type of physical activity these girls wanted to do, whether it be YouTube at home or whether that be their own workouts at home. And this actually resulted in increased motivation for physical activity. However, it must be noted here that it doesn't actually state there was increase in physical activity levels overall. Next slide, please. So overall physical activity at home has been supported where individuals have utilised apps and digital platforms to adhere to physical activity. In particular, women have been seen to adhere to physical activity using online resources more so than men, since they focus more on like instructor-led sport, whereas men are more focused on organised sport or weight training. Thus, it can be seen as a feasible method overall, according to the research. However, this could just be temporary. It's very unclear whether the method could be sustained following the changes in lockdown measures, and it then leads us to question what is sustainable and what is meaningful to those who are taking part in physical activity at home, which is what Joanne will now answer.
Yeah, the concept of meaningful physical education is gaining ground as a useful framework for focusing on thinking about personal relevance, physical challenge, motor competence, social interaction, and joy. And this theoretical perspective comes from Scott Kretschmar. Now, much of the work on meaningful experiences at the moment is centering on PE teachers and their pedagogies for supporting young people to learn in meaningful ways. However, the concept has relevance outside of PE. We might be able to use this concept of meaningfulness to understand what is necessary for somebody to value a physically active life and be engaged in lifelong physical activity. I'm going to pass back to Olivia to describe the methods of the study.
Okay, so this was a mixed methods qualitative design with 15 participants ranging from 21 to 72 years old regarding their physical activity at home. We designed a questionnaire which helps to aid recruitment, asking about physical activity experiences and gain a broad sense of their engagement with physical activity at home. We did one-to-one interviews, which averaged about 52 minutes to help explore the type of physical activity that participants engaged in at home before, during and after COVID, and how this was personally meaningful to them. Then the participants had the opportunity to take part in the photo or text diary for about 4 to 6 weeks, and that basically gave an insight to their experiences of physical activity at home to help us support the immersion in the research. And finally, this was followed by a second interview using elicitation techniques to help discuss their physical activity experiences and also to gain further understanding on the physical activity at home.
So what I'm going to present today is data from 3 of the participants who have completed the study. Data collection is ongoing. So for these 3 participants, having access to equipment to be able to adapt a space and the type of physical activity was helpful for them to embed something into their routine and make the experience personally relevant. Social interaction was also appreciated. One said, "I'd never done online classes before. I was a bit hesitant because I like the interaction part of going to a class. But the yoga teacher would spend 5 or 10 minutes at the start. Just tell me about your day. How's life been?" And I hadn't realized that until the middle of winter lockdown when we were truly on our own. And it's formed a new habit for me. But there were other participants who said that they didn't need social interaction and that doing something at home means not having to make small talk, just get on with the exercise, get it done. Participants chose to do things at home which had accessibility, they were free, they were effective, and they changed to suit their lifestyle. And one said, "It does give me that wiggle room for the days when you just don't feel like doing it. It will still be there tomorrow, it's recorded, so if you haven't missed anything, it's still there." And some would fit in just 5 minutes of physical activity in their garden and appreciate the outdoor time. And one said that she had 5 minutes of yoga in the garden because it felt like when she was outside, it just makes me feel better, it makes me breathe easy, and it's calming. So we can see here some of the elements of the meaningful. We've got physical challenge, we've got choice or relevance, and we've got social interaction. However, it was when talking about physical activity away from home that the participants mentioned most joy in movement. And one of them discussed this concept of micro adventures and her appreciation of the possibility of enjoying environments close to home while abiding by lockdown restrictions, not being able to go to places further away. She discovered the joy in a daily walk on the fields near her home or in the woods. And she discovered that Luton Hoo Lake was available for swimming. So in conclusion, the elements of meaningful physical activity were evident for these 3 participants in the way they'd fitted physical activity at home into their daily lives and had committed to it. So 2 of these 3 had never done PA at home before COVID, and they stuck at it despite restrictions now having been taken away. However, their engagement in physical activity at home did not have the same level of sustained joy or delight that their movement away from home did. And I'm going to give one last quote from one of the participants who described going sea swimming. "I love that experience when you're really out of breath, you know, when you come out of the sea and you're absolutely freezing, but there's a real joy in that feeling that your body has done something quite physical, that physicalness and the joy that it gives you when you've done something." And that was not replicated at home. There are some limitations in our study so far. These 3 are all white women. They all work from home a lot of the time, and they had the space and equipment to engage in their choice of physical activity at home. We have more participants underway, and we look forward to continuing our analysis. So if you are interested in sharing your experiences of physical activity at home and how it fits into your overall engagement in movement, recruitment is still open. I'll post the link into the chat in a short while when I come off air. There's a QR code here as well, which will take you through to our questionnaire. or you can sign up. At PE teachers, we are particularly interested in following a cohort of young people in understanding their physical activity at home and their return to PE post-lockdown. So just want to say thank you for listening. Here's that QR code again. And just 2 acknowledgements, which is to Bedford Borough Council Sport Development Unit for facilitating a lot of the recruitment of participants, and to the University of Chichester Institute of Sport for their placement programme, which has enabled Olivia to work on this project with us. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. We were scheduled a 5-minute break. Let's make it a quick 5 minutes. We're probably going to go slightly over 6 o'clock with our last speaker, which is Michelle Flemmins. So to the audience, would love to have any questions in the chat from you if you have any for us. And Michelle is just going to pop her slides up to check that they are all working, but we will take a break here. Do have a stand up and a stretch, and then we'll reconvene. Let's make it 3 minutes and make it 42 minutes past the hour. So a 3. Of the ISPAR Conference 2021. It's my great pleasure to introduce our alumni keynote to close out the day, Dr. Michelle Flemmins. Dr. Flemmins completed her PhD while working as a senior lecturer here at the University of Bedfordshire in 2019. She now works at St Mary's University in Twickenham, and her current projects cover socialized behaviours in teaching and coaching, holistic athlete development, teachers as gatekeepers to the profession. Over to you, Michelle.
Thank you so much. So what I'm presenting today is socialized practice and its influence on our approaches towards the holistic development of young people through sport and physical education. My presentation today will firstly highlight issues within the field to set up the problem, the importance of holistic approach to coaching and teaching, followed by using a small section of my PhD study to help to explain why change is so slow within the field. I will also look at the theoretical frameworks that underpin the study, give an overview of the literature in the field to set a precedent for the aims of the study, a discussion of the findings, and finally draw some conclusions from this. I will then close by giving some considerations for the future. So what I want you to do now is think about the Olympics. Were there any key factors that stood out to you that relates to the importance of how an athlete feels, their performance and their ability on their performance and ability, and how to make and what choices they can make? So the person that I'm going to use as my example is Simone Biles. Now, she got a terrible case of the twisties. It is an actual thing, okay? She was under a lot of pressure. She'd also been one of Larry Nassar's abuse victims, and she was at one of the biggest world stages for any athlete, being the Olympics. And she got the twisties while she was midair. So the vault is where she does a round off onto the top of the vault. She does 2.5 twists and then lands on her feet. While she was in midair, she lost where she was. The best way I can describe it is if you're going around the roundabout, you get off, you go on your way to work, you kind of do it every single day, you know where you're going, and then suddenly one day you're going around the roundabout and you lose where you are and you can't remember what exit it is because you're focusing on something else. That's basically what it feels like, okay? But she's going at crazy miles an hour in the air upside down. So quite rightly, she was able to pull out of the team composition, women's team competition. Another person is Naomi Osaka. Now, she pulled out of the French Open for mental health reasons. The fact that both athletes could make decisions to look after their overall well-being would indicate that they were empowered to do so and could take responsibility for themselves, with responsibility being the key word. Arguably, physical literacy can provide a philosophical underpinning for coaching and teaching. Physical literacy can be described as the motivation, confidence, physical competence, knowledge and understanding to value and take responsibility for engagement in physical activities for life. And that element of taking responsibility is so important here. So physical literacy is underpinned by monism and existentialism. If we look at the case of Simone Biles, monism, the mind, the body and the environment are all acting together as one, okay? So basically her body and her mind weren't working together in sync with each other. So therefore, in terms of her environment, she wasn't as effective. She could only do 1.5 twists and luckily she landed on her feet. Existentialism is acting from your own free will. So because she could act from her own free will, she could pull out of that competition. And it's pretty common knowledge that within gymnastics and with gymnastics culture, that hasn't always been the case that athletes could do that. Taking Kerry Strug, for example, who had to vault on a broken leg. Yes, the US team did amazing, they won, but at what expense? Now, in order to do these things, we need to have a holistic approach. So the affective, cognitive, physical and social learning all need to be explicit within the way that we teach or the way that we coach. So take a moment to have a look at these newspaper headlines. These athletes are amongst the most talented in the world. What has not had emphasis on in terms of their preparation? So when we look at this, we've got mental health, we've got abuse cases. Somewhere along here, we've had disempowerment, where these students these athletes haven't had a voice. So whose job is it to do this? Is it the coach? Do they have to employ somebody else? Or is it collective as a community, including parents and so on? So my question is that have athletes been prepared holistically? This is also the same in physical education. So is physical education meeting its aims of promoting lifelong physical activity through a holistic approach to teaching and learning? Now, in PE, in English secondary schools, and arguably internationally, is made up of sport as technique, multi-activity, teacher-centered approach that has been recycled for decades with an emphasis on the physical domain. Enstrom argues that this might not be a legitimate aim for physical education. Now, there are high levels of marginalisation within the subject, and childhood memories of PE are associated with sedentary behaviour in adulthood. Now, worryingly, 47% of children are active in the UK. That's not enough. So there is resistance to change, and this is due to the intergenerational links and the interdependent relationships within the field. So that's the older generation educating the younger generation, and interdependent, the same people in the same generation talking to each other. Kirk argued that if the profession continued to reproduce more of the same in the current climate, physical education will become extinct. Pessimistically, Kirk is somewhat sceptical about the profession's ability to engage with radical reform, given historical analysis of curricular change in PE. Change away from this has been very limited. So we need to look at this from a research-informed perspective. I'm going to explore the limits of change further and try to help to explain these issues further by using one of the sections of my PhD study. So this is the paper that I'm writing at the moment, which is Recycling and Resistance to Change in PE, the Informal Recruitment of PE Teachers in English Secondary Schools. So PE teachers are significant in establishing healthy attitudes towards lifelong physical activity. And in terms of defining the problem, given that the curriculum is still made up of multi-activity, sport as technique approach with limited evidence of significant change and ever declining rates of physical activity globally, change needs to start somewhere. And if we've got any coaches here as well that are involved with sport, the same applies to this. So the question is, where can this change begin? In order to address this, I shall introduce the theoretical frameworks used to underpin this particular study. So we used occupational socialization, and there are three distinct phases. The anticipatory phase, which has the most impact on one's beliefs towards how to teach. The professional phase, aka teacher education, coach education, has the least impact because existing beliefs act as filters to new knowledge. And the organizational phase is when teachers are in service. And there's crossover between the anticipatory phase and the organizational phase. As in my gym club, I was a gymnast, and then I became a coach, first of all, within the same club. So this paper focuses on the anticipatory phase. And as a theoretical framework, occupational socialization has an abundance of research surrounding the professional and organizational phases. However, there is limited research focused on the anticipatory phase of occupational socialization. It can be used as a theoretical model for understanding recruitment, education, and ongoing socialization of not only PE teachers, but also arguably coaches. However, it recognises that the organisational phase has relevance due to its connection with the influence of in-service PE teachers in the recruitment of new members. So the concept of the subjective warrant, which is my next area, was also used as a framework in this study. This consists of each person's perceptions of the requirements needed to enter the profession. Students spend 13,000 hours watching their teachers teach. During this time, individuals establish beliefs about what they perceive as effective teaching and apprenticeship of observation, according to Lawty, and students take teaching as a career option into consideration through a process of self-selection or elimination based on personal, situational and societal factors. Dewar and Lawson also suggested that one conception of occupational choice is built on their experiences, including perceptions of ease of entry for physical education. So the subjective warrant was perceived as permissible. In other words, it's dead easy to become a PE teacher. So in terms of the personal factors, PE teachers were facilitators for the recruitment process, often giving advice to support potential recruits in their journey to teacher education. However, there is limited insight into how this process works. So drawing from Templin's observation that there is limited emphasis on the anticipatory phase, the aim of this study was to provide an explanation of who the PE recruits are, why they are attracted to teaching physical education, what factors influence their decision to enter the profession in order to gain a deeper understanding as to why there is so much resistance to change within the field. Now, in terms of the methods and methodology, it was broadly informed by the interpretivist paradigm. There were 27 semi-structured interviews that were conducted with pre-service, NQT and 5-year plus in-service teachers. Thematic analysis was used in conjunction with Bourdieu's Habitus, Field and Practice, which acted as a thinking tool to analyse the data. Bourdieu's Habitus was used to, sorry, lost myself for a second, part of a larger mixed method study exploring the currency of the subjective warrant is where this actually fits. So it's part of a bigger study where in physical, where those thoughts, feelings and perceptions change over time. So in terms of the perspectives on teacher change, PE teachers who join the profession because they enjoyed it are less likely to change practice. Teachers needed a clear vision for change, as well as the resources for implementation, collaboration, and social learning. Teachers' deeply held beliefs established during school impact on how they teach when they enter the profession. And finally, teachers are more likely to prompt change if they are A, dissatisfied with the current practice, B, have self-efficacy to change, and C, a willingness to change. So in terms of the group Habitus, quick definition of Habitus, these are the things that we do subconsciously without thinking, based on the practices we witness and engage with within our field or within our environment. And this group Habitus is inherent within the field. So once an individual's habitus has been developed through sustained and repetitive practices within the field, the physical, emotional and cognitive dispositions towards this field will provide guidance for an individual's perception of how they need to act within it. The behaviours of an individual will be viewed positively, providing they conform to the practices already embedded within that particular field. And changing those dispositions can be challenging, thus facilitating that continuity of deeply embedded practices in whether it's in sport or whether it's in PE, in this case in PE. So a group habitus is possible after a long period of shared or similar experiences. So in terms of my findings, the subjective warrant was used as a framework to identify and examine the factors that influence the participants' journey into the profession. Participants acknowledged that it was hard to obtain information because school careers advice services gave limited advice regarding future careers in PE. Woods, Richards and Ayers concluded that PE teachers contributed to recruitment into the profession. However, the findings illustrate the extent to which existing physical education teachers influenced who the profession announced itself to. Harriet, a pre-service teacher, represents this during her interview when discussing with her head of sixth form with a PE background as a source of support. This was not the case for all potential recruits. Harold recalled that there was information for other careers, but not much for teaching PE. Therefore, PE teachers are central to identifying who can enter the field, guided by their own beliefs and about what attributes a PE teacher needs to be successful. The findings identified 3 informal recruitment factors used by in-service teachers: physical competence, effort, and enthusiasm for the traditional curricula, providing explanation as to why the profession is so resistant to change. Physical competence in traditional games-based sport is highly valued by the teachers already in the profession. And Sammy, a pre-service teacher, recognised that his physical competence in multiple areas of the curricula meant that he was given plenty of opportunity. Physical competence gave participants status and recognition from their PE teachers, as well as contributing towards their sporting habitus through school sports and sports outside. So positive attitudes and high engagement contribute significantly to PE involvement and subsequently initial recruitment by the physical education teachers. Those who played for school teams without excelling in a range of team sports were perceived as contributory team members within PE department. Katie, who had 5 years plus teaching experience, did not identify herself as sporty. However, she was very much involved within the activities on offer. This was also reflected in Sammy's quote, highlighting the significance of a heavy games-orientated curricula. Gym, dance and swimming wasn't dominant, and therefore it is questionable as to whether the students with these strengths had the opportunity to demonstrate physical competence, effort and enthusiasm in PE. Now, participants with high physical competence, effort and enthusiasm within that traditional curricula fostered meaningful relationships with their PE teachers through shared sporting experiences and also a matching habitus. By way of illustration, Harriet gave a detailed account of her own relationship with her PE department in her school and how it evolved over time as she matured. Acceptance within the PE department was very important to her, and she valued her sense of belonging. Harriet had transitioned from student to potential PE teacher. She liked to feel needed by the staff and was a willing participant in supporting everyday tasks. This acted as a rite of passage and an additional layer of socialisation into the profession. The additional time spent within the PE department was a result of extra opportunities given to her as a valued contributor and team player within that field. This also allowed her to test her conception of what was needed to join the profession. The aforementioned relationship between physical education teachers and other potential recruits were built during extracurricular activities outside of lessons. So by Lorty and Dewar and Lawson noted the importance of the interpersonal theme. This is supported by Brown's work on intergenerational links. So that's how we interact with each other. The quotation from Sammy supports the notion by illustrating the exclusivity of opportunities for the sporty kids, as well as the different relationship that was established through these opportunities. This supports the idea that sporty children are given an exclusive experience over and above their peers who may not show that physical competence, effort and enthusiasm for the traditional curricula valued by their PE teachers. Others who did not hold that meaningful relationship and may not have also shared that group habitus. There was witnessing practices that didn't align on how they felt it should be taught, acted as a motivator for some people to enter the profession. And Holly recognised this. So her PE teacher recruited and supported someone who shared the ideals about teaching. And Holly herself was actually inspired by another PE teacher who had left that particular school because she did not feel like a particularly good fit. So in conclusion, a lack of independent careers advice for teaching PE in English secondary schools means that PE teachers have an informal recruitment process of their own. It allows those that already foster the group habitus to have an advantage over those that don't have that ease of entry into the profession. The subjective warrant is stringent during the anticipatory phase. So during that time at school, that selection process means that not everyone is going to think, oh, I'm going to be a PE teacher. The same as coaching, that idea is reciprocated really. So to promote change and challenge the current practices, more recruits are needed with greater diversity and variety of experiences and beliefs. Capacity, opportunity and motivation to promote change could disrupt the group habitus and move away from the traditional curricula. The group habitus has implications not only for the recruitment, but also for the retention of physical education teachers. So the ones that don't necessarily match the field may end up entering career frustration and leaving. So for future consideration, is there a similar narrative in sports coaching? And are we recruiting from within, even with our coaches? How can coach education and teacher education have more impact during that professional phase, which has the least impact of at all? So where are the similarities between coaching and teaching, and what can we learn from each other? How can we ensure we recruit with physical education and sport to create a shift in the group habitus and promote a more holistic approach, most importantly, particularly if we're thinking about a shifting culture, to make sure that all our athletes are empowered and they are embodying the positive messages about themselves. So to promote a more holistic approach, I'm also interested in how relational pedagogies can be integrated in day-to-day teaching and coaching to support trauma-responsive teaching and coaching generally. So thank you very much for listening. Does anyone have any questions? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle, for that really engaging presentation. So I think actually what we will do is I will just share my screen. And so I am going to I'm going to invite actually questions to be asked verbally or in the chat. If you would like to stay and ask Michelle a question verbally rather than in the chat, you can do so. Seeing as we're at the end and no one else is waiting to come on and speak. So while I'm waiting for any questions to arise, just want to give my thanks to all the speakers and the audience for attending today. The conference continues tomorrow, starting at 10 a.m, hosted by the Centre for Physical Activity and Sport Performance. We welcome continuing discussions on social media, and please look out for the link to the recording of today's session on YouTube. I just want to say good evening, everybody, and I hope you have an enjoyable rest of the day. If speakers want to stay behind for a couple of minutes just for an extra thank you, that would be lovely. But there we go, we've wrapped up. Thank you very much. Yeah, Michelle, if you're still there.
Still there. You're right.
Well